Get your filthy hands off my son now! Charles Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip across the courtyard of the prestigious Brookstone Academy, halting every conversation and freezing children mid-step. The billionaire real estate magnate stormed forward, his face flushed with fury, toward a tall black man in a blue janitor's uniform, Elijah Carter, who was holding 8-year-old Oliver's trembling hand. Elijah didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted slightly, placing himself between the boy and his enraged father, his calm gaze steady in the chaos. "Mr. Whitmore, I can explain." "Explain what?" Charles spat, venom dripping from every syllable. "Why a janitor is touching my son? Security! Now!" Oliver's voice, small and shaking, tried to cut through the tension. "Dad, Mr. Elijah was helping me. Quiet, Oliver," Charles snapped, yanking his son away with unnecessary force. Phones appeared in the crowd, capturing every second. Elijah's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the controlled anger of a man who had weathered storms far worse. "You're right, Mr. Whitmore," he said evenly. "Maybe I shouldn't be here. But your son was bleeding from his forehead after a fall, and as a former pediatric neurosurgeon, I simply offered basic first aid." A stunned silence rippled through the courtyard. Charles sneered. "Former doctor? Sure. And I'm a former astronaut," parents whispered, torn between curiosity and the weight of Charles's influence. Elijah glanced around, memorizing faces, each complicit in the humiliation. His voice lowered, but carried a quiet promise. "Our conversation isn't over." He turned away, walking toward the maintenance closet with a dignity that unsettled everyone watching. They didn't know it yet, but this was the moment the game began, and Elijah Carter never started something he didn't intend to finish. What would you do if you were Elijah? Walk away or fight back? The morning after the confrontation, Elijah Carter walked into Brookstone Academy to a chilling change in the air. Where there were once casual greetings and friendly nods from staff, there were now averted eyes, hurried steps, and whispers that stopped the moment he passed. In the supply room, Supervisor Harris stood stiffly with a clipboard, her voice overly formal as she said, "Elijah, we've received concerns from several parents regarding your behavior with students." He kept his hands moving, aligning bottles of disinfectant with surgical precision, the old muscle memory from operating rooms still embedded in him. "Concerns?" he asked, his tone calm, but his jaw set. Harris avoided his eyes. "Perhaps it's best if you focus on administrative duties for now." It was déjà vu. 23 years earlier, he had been Dr. Elijah Carter, one of the most respected pediatric neurosurgeons in the country, until the day a young patient, son of a powerful senator, died on his operating table from unforeseen complications. In the search for someone to blame, the fact that Elijah was a black doctor from a working-class background made him the perfect scapegoat. The license was stripped, the lawsuits drained his savings, and his marriage collapsed under the weight of the scandal. That chapter had taught him a brutal truth. Society didn't just punish mistakes, it punished those who stepped into spaces it believed they didn't belong. But this time, Elijah vowed, would be different. That evening, while making his rounds, he noticed something peculiar. Charles Whitmore was often late picking up Oliver, sometimes by nearly an hour. On more than one occasion, Elijah found the boy sitting alone on the empty playground, shoulders trembling in silent tears. He also began to overhear snippets of Charles's phone calls, words like fake documents, audit, and make sure they stay quiet. His instincts as both a doctor and a man who'd seen the ugliest side of power told him something was very wrong. 3 days later, a subpoena arrived. Charles had filed a police report accusing Elijah of suspicious contact with a minor. His photo was now circulating in neighborhood watch groups under captions warning of a predator. At the police station, Chief Douglas Price, clearly uneasy, asked the routine questions. Elijah answered with the same steady composure he once used when explaining risky procedures to terrified parents. "Officer, while you investigate me, I ask that you also consider my concerns about Oliver Whitmore's well-being," he said, pulling a small, leather notebook from his pocket. He outlined detailed observations, panic attacks, excessive fear of his father, injuries inconsistent with typical childhood accidents, all described in precise medical terminology. Chief Price raised an eyebrow. This was not the language of a janitor. Across town, Charles was holding court over dinner at his golf club, regaling business associates with a twisted version of the story, each retelling painting Elijah in a darker light. But the billionaire didn't realize that the man he thought he'd crushed had already begun gathering evidence, patiently, methodically, and with the kind of precision that once saved lives in an operating room. Elijah's quiet investigation gained momentum in the shadows. Every night as the prestigious halls of Brookstone Academy emptied and silence settled over the playground, he became both custodian and chronicler, sweeping floors while recording the words and actions of a man who thought himself untouchable. The small digital recorder hidden in his uniform was always running when Charles Whitmore made his calls in the parking lot, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone when discussing offshore accounts and ways to deal with troublesome people. But what unsettled Elijah most was Oliver. The boy's smile, when it appeared at all, was faint and fleeting, and the bruises on his arms were too patterned to be accidental. The signs of emotional neglect were written in the child's posture, head low, eyes always scanning for his father's reaction. Elijah's medical instincts told him this was not simply a matter of poor parenting. This was abuse. He needed confirmation. He called Dr. Margaret Lewis, one of the few who had stood by him when the world turned its back. She listened without interrupting, then agreed to meet. 2 nights later, in a quiet corner of a cafe, Margaret slid a folder across the table. "These are from your old case," she said softly. "Letters of recommendation, patient testimonials, evidence buried by political pressure." Elijah's hands tightened around the folder, but before he could speak, Margaret added, "I'll examine Oliver discreetly. If what you suspect is true, we'll have what we need." Meanwhile, Charles doubled down on his smear campaign. Through parent groups and whispered conversations, he painted Elijah as a dangerous man with a hidden past. He even hired a private investigator to dig up dirt, unaware that Elijah was already steps ahead. For years, Elijah had learned to be underestimated. It was his shield and his weapon. Late one evening, as Elijah wiped down the front entrance, a small voice called his name. Oliver stood there alone, eyes red, clutching a crumpled drawing. "Mr. Elijah, my dad says you're bad, but you've always been nice. He hurts me when he's mad." Elijah knelt down, his heart breaking at the sight of fresh marks on the boy's arm. Gently, he asked, "Can you tell me what happens?" The child hesitated, then whispered about being locked in his room, being struck, being told he was worthless. Elijah's stomach tightened with rage, but his voice stayed calm. "You're safe with me, Oliver. I promise." That night, Elijah and Margaret spoke for hours, mapping a careful plan. They couldn't rush. Every step had to be precise, every piece of evidence airtight. Charles was wealthy, connected, and ruthless. But Elijah had something Charles could never understand: patience forged through decades of injustice, and an unshakable resolve to protect a child who deserved far better than the life he'd been given. The following week, the tension at Brookstone Academy became almost tangible. Whispers followed Elijah through the corridors like a shadow, and the once friendly smiles of staff had grown cautious, wary. It was clear Charles Whitmore's reach was as wide as it was venomous. But Elijah's mind was fixed, not on the gossip, but on Oliver. Every detail mattered: when the boy arrived, how he left, who picked him up, the subtle changes in his demeanor. Elijah had started keeping a meticulous log in his small black notebook, each entry a testament to the slow, quiet build of a case that could dismantle Charles entirely. Margaret worked with equal precision. Discreetly, she arranged for Oliver to visit her clinic under the pretense of a school health check. The x-rays she took told the story Oliver's words couldn't: fractures in various stages of healing, bruises consistent with repeated blunt trauma. The evidence was irrefutable, yet Elijah knew that confronting Charles too soon would be dangerous. Charles was already becoming restless. At the Brookstone Business Club, over cigars and brandy, he bragged to his circle about putting a certain janitor back in his place. His business partner, Andrew Carlisle, laughed along, unaware that just days earlier, Elijah had recorded Charles discussing Cayman Islands accounts and silencing a factory whistleblower. Those recordings, stored in triplicate and encrypted, were Elijah's ace. Meanwhile, Margaret began rallying allies: civil rights attorneys, child psychologists, and even an investigative journalist named Daniel Ross, whose work exposing corporate corruption had toppled more than one empire. They met in secret, in back rooms and quiet cafes, piecing together three threads: child abuse, financial crime, and racial discrimination. "We can take him down on any one of these," Margaret said during one meeting, her eyes glinting with determination. "But together, he won't recover." Elijah leaned back, his voice low but certain. "Then we aim for all three." At home, Charles sensed something shifting. Victoria, Helen, had grown distant, questioning his obsession with destroying the janitor. "You're overreacting," she told him one night. "Oliver said the man helped him." Charles dismissed her concerns with a sneer. "He's a child. He doesn't know danger when he sees it." But Helen's doubt had taken root. 2 days later, Elijah received a visitor he hadn't expected so soon: Helen herself. She stood at his door, hands trembling, eyes glistening. "I can't watch him hurt Oliver anymore," she said. "Tell me what I can do." Elijah ushered her inside, knowing that her testimony could be the final blow. With Helen's cooperation, they began building a timeline of abuse and neglect, cross-referenced with the financial crimes Daniel was uncovering. Every step was documented, every fact corroborated. The net around Charles Whitmore was tightening, and for the first time, Elijah could see the faint glimmer of an endgame, a reckoning years in the making. The alliance between Elijah, Margaret, Daniel, and Helen began to operate like a finely tuned machine. Late at night, when Brookstone Academy was empty, Elijah would make his rounds with calculated purpose, ensuring that every compromising conversation Charles had in the parking lot was captured in crystal clarity. The billionaire's arrogance was his undoing. He never lowered his voice, never imagined the janitor was anything more than a shadow sweeping up after him. But Elijah was no shadow. He was the storm gathering silently at the horizon. Helen provided intimate details of Charles's drinking habits, his violent tempers, and the nights Oliver had been locked alone in his room. Margaret cross-checked those accounts with the boy's medical records, compiling a chronological map of abuse that could stand unshaken in court. Daniel, for his part, traced a web of shell companies and offshore accounts, following the money trail to hidden vaults in the Cayman Islands and anonymous trusts in Liechtenstein. The picture was clear. Charles Whitmore wasn't just an abusive father. He was a criminal empire wearing a tailored suit. But the challenge lay in timing. Elijah knew that striking too soon could give Charles a chance to bury the evidence or intimidate witnesses. The plan, therefore, became one of patience and precision. Build the case until it was so airtight that not even Charles's fortune could buy a crack in it. Meanwhile, Charles intensified his smear campaign. Rumors about Elijah spread through the school's elite parent circles like a slow poison, whispered warnings about a dangerous man who couldn't be trusted with children. Security staff were quietly instructed to keep an eye on him. Yet every slight, every insult only sharpened Elijah's resolve. Then came the turning point. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Oliver appeared at Elijah's door alone, soaked to the bone. "Mr. Elijah," he said, his voice trembling, "Dad's angry again. He hurt me." Elijah's gaze dropped to the boy's arm, fresh bruises blooming under the skin, the kind you could feel before you even saw them. It was the proof they needed, delivered by fate's cruel hand. That night, Margaret examined Oliver under the discreet care of her most trusted staff. Photographs were taken, statements recorded, all stored in multiple secure locations. For Elijah, the boy's small voice recounting the abuse cut deeper than any injustice he had ever endured. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about protecting Oliver at all costs. Helen, her hands shaking but her resolve solid, signed a sworn affidavit detailing years of abuse and neglect. With every piece of evidence falling into place, the moment of truth was drawing near. Elijah could almost feel it, the shift in the air, the sense that the hunter was about to become the prey. Soon, Charles Whitmore would face the reckoning he had earned, and there would be no escape, no silver-tongued denial, no amount of wealth to shield him from the truth. The storm broke on a Monday morning. Margaret had assembled her discreet network in a hidden conference room at the back of a law office downtown. Around the table sat a child psychologist, a civil rights attorney, Daniel with his thick file of financial crimes, and Helen, pale but determined, clutching Oliver's sworn statement like a lifeline. Elijah entered last, his presence quiet but commanding. For weeks he had been the silent architect, the man behind the curtain orchestrating every move. Now the blueprints of justice were spread before him. "We move in three phases," Margaret began, her voice steady. "Child protection services first, financial crimes second, public exposure third." Elijah nodded, adding, "And the order matters. If we lead with the abuse, the public sympathy shifts before he can spin the narrative. By the time the financial charges hit, he'll already be drowning." Daniel tapped the stack of evidence. "This is enough to bury him. Offshore accounts, false invoices, bribery payments, it's all here. The IRS will have a field day." The plan was set. That afternoon, Helen arranged for Oliver to stay with a trusted family friend under the guise of a study week. Elijah, meanwhile, continued his rounds at the academy as though nothing was amiss. Charles, oblivious to the trap tightening around him, strutted through the halls boasting about an upcoming expansion deal overseas. But behind every arrogant smile was a man who had no idea his empire was built on crumbling ground. 2 days later, the first strike landed. Child protection agents, accompanied by uniformed officers, arrived at Brookstone Academy just as the morning drop-off was in full swing. Parents craned their necks to see what was happening, whispers spreading like wildfire. Charles was pulled aside for questioning, his confident facade cracking as Oliver was escorted into a waiting car with a female officer. "This is outrageous," Charles bellowed, but the cameras from a local news crew, tipped off by Daniel, caught every word. That evening, a second blow struck. The IRS executed a warrant on Whitmore Holdings, seizing documents and freezing accounts. By nightfall, Charles's face was splashed across the evening news, headlines screaming about child abuse allegations and financial misconduct. But the final act, Elijah knew, would be the public unmasking, the moment when the court of public opinion saw the truth laid bare. Margaret scheduled a press conference for Friday morning at the academy, framing it as an urgent matter of community safety. Behind closed doors, Helen rehearsed her statement, her voice breaking but resolute. Daniel prepared the financial evidence for display, and Elijah, in the quiet of his small apartment, went over every recording one last time, ensuring there were no gaps, no questions left unanswered. Friday was coming, and with it, the fall of Charles Whitmore. Elijah could already see it. The cameras flashing, the questions shouted. The man who had tried to crush him finally brought to his knees. Justice, long delayed, was about to arrive, swift, merciless, and undeniable. The morning of the press conference dawned crisp and bright, the kind of day when the air felt charged, as if it knew history was about to be written. Elijah stood at the academy entrance, a simple navy suit replacing his janitor's uniform, his posture tall and unshakable. Margaret was beside him, her dark blazer immaculate, Daniel clutching a sleek folder, and Helen holding Oliver's small hand. The courtyard buzzed with reporters, cameras, and curious parents, their whispers rising into a nervous hum. At exactly 9 a.m., Charles's black limousine rolled into the parking lot. He stepped out, sunglasses masking his eyes, phone pressed to his ear. But when he saw the media swarm, his stride faltered. Questions flew like arrows about the abuse, the tax evasion, the offshore accounts. His polished smile twisted into something brittle. Margaret took the podium first, introducing the assembled team and outlining the evidence with surgical precision. Then came Helen, her voice trembling but clear. "For years I stayed silent out of fear, but fear ends today. My son deserves safety, love, and truth." Cameras clicked furiously as Oliver stepped forward, clutching Elijah's hand. The contrast was undeniable. The child's trust in Elijah, his shrinking from Charles's presence. Finally, Elijah approached the microphones. "Some people measure power in wealth," he began, his voice low but carrying across the courtyard. "But real power lies in patience, in knowing the truth will surface if you protect it long enough." He spoke not with vengeance, but with the quiet authority of a man who had already won. Then Daniel stepped forward, holding up the flash drive. 47 recordings, he announced, capturing Mr. Whitmore's own words about bribery, threats, and tax fraud. The reporters erupted. Charles tried to speak, but the questions drowned him out. Within minutes, federal agents moved in, escorting him toward an unmarked car. His empire had crumbled in full view of the people whose approval he had once commanded. As Charles disappeared from sight, Oliver looked up at Elijah. "It's over, isn't it?" Elijah smiled faintly. "For him, yes. For us, it's just the beginning." That night, the footage aired nationwide, transforming Elijah from the janitor into a symbol of justice. And to those who had once doubted him, the message was clear. Never judge a man by the role he's forced to play. Sometimes the man you underestimate is the one who rewrites the rules. If this story moved you, subscribe for more timeless stories where truth, courage, and justice prove that no amount of prejudice can bury the light forever.